My friends, how's it going? It's day 3. I know there's a lot of glossy eyes out there, but we're going to be talking about some amazing stuff today. And we want all of your feedback on this stuff. We're doing practical end-to-end AI development using Prompty and AI Studio. It's a cool thing. We want to get your feedback. If you have any questions, we want to take them all. But this is what we're doing today. And we decided to go all out with a fun logo. So this is we got to make stickers and t-shirts and hats. So if anyone wants those, let me know. We're going to talk about getting started with, thank you. Getting started with LLMs. We're going to talk about the Prompty spec, because it's actually a specification. We're going to talk about getting started with Prompty in Visual Studio Code. And then we're going to talk about developing an app with Prompty and what it looks like. The reality is that I thought I would start with how I think about LLMs. It's kind of funny. I think this is the AI Studio, and this is the chat playground, as you've seen. And so the way I like to think about LLMs is a little bit different, and hopefully you'll follow along with me. I like to think of LLMs as giant language calculators. Okay, let me show you what I mean. So anyone here European? The Eurovision Song Contest just recently started. It's the pageantry, the costumes, the joie de vivre for you French people out there. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a little C copilot that helps us with the Eurovision Song Contest. You are an AI assistant that helps people find information about the Eurovision Song Contest. One of the warnings that I have is you should never think of these things as databases. LLMs are not databases. They're language calculators. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to ask here, who won the first ESC? Now, when I went to school, this ESC thing and Eurovision Song Contest, the official term for this in NLP is co-reference resolution. And many PhDs were milled in this particular field of study, but the LLM does not care about our PhDs. So notice it did a good job, but you're like, but wait, Seth, I thought you said don't treat these things as databases. You're right. So let me show you why. Who won ESC in 2023? And you're gonna, hopefully they didn't train the model more since then, but notice that, looks like it does though. Let's see who won it, ESC in 2024. So we asked the question, did anyone win it yet, by the way? Someone won it already? How come it doesn't know? Because it's not a database. It's a language calculator. And when we trained it, I say we as in, Real Madrid, we won the game kind of thing. When we trained it, we gave it the internet and we tried to predict the next token, right? That's what actually happened. And so along the way, it learned things about language, but it also learned some stuff. But that's not the stuff that we want. So let me see. So do we know who won Eurovision 2024? Someone want to shout it out for me? Eurovision 20. Yeah, it's about time, right? So who? Malmo Eurovision 2024. Is there? Oh, here it is. Wikipedia 2024. I'm just gonna Control C this, and then I'm gonna go over here and I'm gonna say This is what you know. Okay, so I'll put that on there, apply changes. Okay, and now I'm going to say who won ESC in 2024. And I'm crossing my fingers, right, because, did it get it right? Yes. It did. Yeah, that's cool. An LLM that can be taught. You're looking at this and you're like, that's fairly unremarkable, Seth. You gave it an answer and then asked it the answer to the question. What I've just shown you is retrieval augmented generation. However, I did it artisanally with my fingers and Wikipedia, right? This is what this thing is. You give it a paragraph, and you give it another paragraph, and you tell it to generate a thing. That's what retrieval augmented generation is. It's just that we make it so fancy that it's like, oh, that's for smart people. But hey, if I can do it artistically with my fingers, it's not as bad. What about this? What should I put on my tacos? That's a really good question. Whoa, what is the best style of dance? Why is it saying that? Because I told it to. Yes, look at this. I sneakily put this thing in here. You can see salsa. And now you're starting to get a sense for this thing really is a giant language calculator. So I could tell it paragraph A plus paragraph B minus paragraph C, and then you get a response out. And I was thinking about this. I was like, oh, why don't we make an abstraction that puts this back as the priority of the thing, right? Why don't we put the prompt back in prompt engineering and make it a first-class asset and thing, right? And so that's where Prompty came about. So that's my cheesy demo. We measure skillfulness of talks on TTD, time to demo. So that was really fast, right? So what is Prompty? It's actually three things. It is a specification, a standard format that unifies the prompt and how it's executed in one package. That way you can experiment and work with it quickly. The second thing it is it's some tooling that enables you in your own environment to work with these prompts at a high level. And the last thing is it's a runtime. So let's talk about each one of these things, right? Prompty is basically a language agnostic prompt asset. We have a specification for it, what goes in where and whatever. We would love every language in the universe to use this, right? So that now the prompt becomes the thing that you work on. Because if you've ever done like LangChain or semantic kernel or even prompt flow, you know that it's the prompt that you need to change a lot, right? That's the thing that you're actually working on. And so why not bring that to the surface, to the top? So the goal is to simplify the actual workflow. In Visual Studio Code, we made a Prompty extension that does a bunch of stuff. Like it does some autocomplete, it does some color syntax and highlighting, it does validation, quick run, code generation. We're looking at other stuff to put in there that makes you more productive as a developer. But as you look at this Prompty file, the reason why it looks so familiar is because it's just Markdown with front matter stuff that tells it, hey, what should I put in there? Last but not least, Prompty as a runtime library, Prompty it's more of like, you know how people are like, it's more of like a lifestyle. I don't want to be that guy, so I won't say that. But it's basically a specification, some tooling, and how you should write a runtime if you want to do it. The runtimes that we currently support are PromptFlow and LangChain, right? And so if you're working with Prompties, you can totally continue to use your LangChain code, and it will work just fine. In C#, there's support for this in semantic kernel. And we'll continue to make it more available in more languages, or maybe you will, because thank you, we want you to, right? We're also looking at TypeScript and JavaScript, because if you look at the extension itself, you may not know this, but the extension is written in TypeScript and JavaScript, and all of the nuances there work. We haven't released that one yet. We're going to show you mostly everything in PromptFlow, because that's how we understand things, but we would love for this to be extended and to be something in your language. I would love to see a Rust Prompty library, or if someone's using Scheme in the back, don't be ashamed. It's a beautiful language, right? So stuff like that, right? So that's what that's all about. So where does Prompty actually fit, though, right? Because this is it's like, oh, geez, Seth, another orchestrator, right? I like to think of orchestrators in terms of a spectrum. Okay, I'm going to use this thing. Let's see if it works. Ooh, yeah. So I like to think of this left hand as orchestration of prompts together. Who's in charge? Is it you completely, or is it some library, right? At the bottom level, I like to think of a use case. Is it super non-specific or super specific? So if any of you have used TypeScript or TypeChat, what it does is it uses an LLM to force your responses into a particular JSON schema. Very use case specific, all orchestrated in a library. Does that make sense? The second one that I like to talk about is the most generic kind, which is a pure API call. The API call is the most generic, and you do all the work. PromptFlow is a little bit higher because you need to write your prompts and you need to do the orchestration yourself. As you go all the way to the top with agentic-based things like AutoGen, notice that the orchestration is handled in the library, and there's places for all of these things. Prompty lives about a half step up from an API call. half step up. And there's 4 things that it does in any runtime. Now, the runtime will decide how to do this, but what it will do is it will take inputs, it will render the actual markdown so that it's actually the text that you want. It will parse it into the shape that the LLM needs it. You know how you have to have like a user assistant, user system. It will parse that for you. It will execute the LLM call, and sometimes it will do some post-processing. This is what we suggest you should do. The required one-time methods have to have some shape or form of a load a prompty, execute a prompty, and trace it. Okay, so this is the developer flow we see. If you're looking at this and you're like, wow, that looks like a regular developer flow, it is. We're only going to be covering the top half because we're dubbing this the unofficial Prompty keynote, non-keynote, right? So we're going to talk about starting, developing, and we're going to get into evaluating, but there's a lot of more sessions that you've probably seen. There's Prompty in there a little bit, sprinkled in an evaluation and other things. So we'll get to that soon. So now I think we need to get into Prompty. So to take a look at Prompty, I'm going to invite Leah to come on stage. Leah? Oh, and since this is semi-keynote, I have to do the music. So let's clap. Da 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 da.
Thanks, Seth. I'm Leah. I'm a product manager on the Azure AI team, and today I'm here to show you what it looks and feels like to develop with Prompty. Wake up my screen here.
I got you. Ooh!
We can see it.
I got an assist, and I'm not even a sportsman.
Thanks, Seth. Okay, so how it looks and feels to develop with Prompty, and the spoiler alert here is it's pretty dang easy. So as you saw in the keynote yesterday, we could bring a Prompty from AI Studio, but for today, we're going to start in my local development environment and just build this up from scratch. So you can even do this with me. You can follow along. We're going to use the Prompty extension in VS Code. So you can see my screen here. From the marketplace, I've installed the Prompty extension, and I can get started right away. So I'm going to right-click here and select New Prompty. Now, for those that have been following along in the session so far at Build, you probably have seen some of these files pop up here and there. And we're really building with Prompty throughout our applications. So what we're looking at here is a markdown file that has a system prompt that probably people are pretty familiar with. But it has a modified front matter that lets us define in YAML some of the specifications, and the Prompty runtime and the extension will help us run this. So we all know and love Seth, but it's not always all about Seth. So let's make a few updates here. All right. So what we're looking at is we can see this configuration here that we can specify that we want to connect to a chat completion model. And I'm using an Azure OpenAI model that I have deployed in my Azure AI project. So let's bring in some things here to make this work. And as you'll see, I'm kind of going to go through this and show you little pieces that I did to set up my development environment, but there's very little that I did, and I'll highlight it as we go. So let me bring this in here. And then we're going to use GPT-4, but of course, across all the sessions, you've seen a lot of examples of some really cool and fun models that you can use to play with this. OK, so we can also update some parameters, and the extension gives us some helpful completions here. So I can see the options that I have to update parameters. In this case, let's update the temperature because we want some more creative responses. And we're going to keep to the theme of the 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 as we're doing across the board here. So this will be our 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 prompt, and it's going to use context to ground an incoming question. We can see here that we provide a sample, and this aligns the inputs of what the Prompty expects. My first name is Leah, and then we're giving it some context, and it's going to use that context to ground the question that I asked, to ground its response. So we can preview this and actually see what the model is going to get. So what I can see here is that this is the system prompt, and we're going to let the system know it's an assistant to help answer questions, and we're going to ask it to add some personal flair, which is just characteristic of Prompty as an experience. And you can see that it filled in the customer details here. So the first name was Leah. It has the context that it needs, and it knows the question that I'm asking. And because I specified this sample, we can run this right out of the gate. So what this is going to do is it's going to load and show us the Prompty output, and we'll be able to see the response we get from the model. OK, so let me give a little more screen here. So we can see that it called the model that I specified, and it's referring to me. It's saying, hey, Leah. We can see the emojis popping up that are related to the outdoorsy theme. And I asked it about tents here, and because the context we provided was talking about a specific tent, it's grounding its response with that context, so we can see it's responding specifically about the Alpine Explorer tent that it knows about. OK, now if we wanted a little more details about the calls and the requests that are being made, you can use the verbose output with Prompty. But for now, the Prompty output gives us what we want to see. So you might have noticed that we didn't specify authentication here. We just specified our endpoint and deployment. So this is using Azure Active Directory Authentication, or AAD, and that's what we recommend for building secure applications. And one thing to note that I did here is I actually specified a specific, I set a role assignment on my Azure OpenAI resource to make this work. Now, if you tried this and you hadn't set up that role, you'd actually get a helpful error message that would walk you through the steps you need to do to set that up, and then you'd be able to run this. Now, we also know that developers like their specific preferences in their development environment, and we want to meet developers where they are. So we provide the system also can interpret environment variables and .m files in a pretty standard format. And I'm just going to show you, here I have sort of my full samples that I can pull from and just show you an example. So if I had a .m file that looked something like this with the OpenAI endpoint that I wanted, I could look at this Prompty here, and if I just replaced the endpoint with this reference to the environment variable, it would be able to pull that in. OK, so if you have, we've looked at these model configurations here, but let's say you had multiple Prompties that were going to share configurations, or you wanted to be able to easily switch between configurations. The Prompty extension has a nice way to do that. So down here, I can select my configurations. I can see the ones that are pre-specified for me, and I could modify them or add new ones. So what this is going to do is use the VS Code user settings, and it's going to point me to directly the settings.json that I want to modify to make this work. So what you can see here is I have my default configuration, looks similar to what I had specified in the Prompty file. Because I specified the endpoint and the deployment in the Prompty, it overrides what we see here, but I could fall back to this or use it if I wanted to configure and share configurations. If I had a different kind of model connection that I wanted, I could specify something different here in the settings. Now, we also know that developers often work in teams and use source control. And so an additional property that you can set here is actually a workspace setting. And so I'm going to switch to workspace configurations. And you'll notice on the left that now it created a file for me in the VS Code settings that I could actually check into my Git repository. And then my coworkers, my team members could recreate this development environment and run the same application. OK, so let's customize this and make it a little bit more our own. Let's customize this prompt and do a bit of prompt engineering. So far, we have an outdoorsy prompt. Let me give us a little bit more space that takes in some context and answers a question. And we've asked it to be personable and add some personal flair with the emojis. And we saw that in action. But let's have it tell us a joke as well. So I'm going to bring in some context here. And we'll walk through the changes that I'm making to the prompt. So what I've added to the system message here is add an outdoorsy joke. I'm telling it a little bit about how I want it to phrase the joke, and I'm also asking it to tell a joke that's directly related to the specific question asked. Because I want to be able to parse and see the response in the joke and maybe do some more things with this a little later on, I want it to respond with a JSON object, and I can specify an additional parameter here to help make this response consistent. So I'll use Control-Enter again, pick response format, and I can specify a JSON object here. So let's give this a run. I'm actually going to use F5 as a shortcut here, and we're going to see if we get back a joke. OK, so I can see the response. Now we're looking at a JSON object. The response will look pretty similar because we kept the same content. But then I get a joke here. By the way, why don't tents ever get lonely? Because they're always pitched in a good location. Not sure how much sense that joke makes. I get something different every time I run this. But we're going to get to explore and see how either we can make it better or at least know that this joke doesn't make that much sense. OK, so here's what we've seen so far. We've seen us load up a Prompty. We can run it right out of the box. We can make some changes, customize the details that we have, and set the configurations to fit what we want. So now as a developer, I'm wondering, how can I integrate this into my code? So I might want to work with LangChain. And so I could right-click this Prompty and select Add LangChain Code. This is going to show me a code snippet for LangChain that I, in my LangChain-enabled environment, would be able to run out of the box. I may prefer C# and want to work with semantic kernel, and I could load a similar code snippet that's actually quite simple that I would be able to run using semantic kernel. But for me, as a developer attending Build 2024, it's been so exciting to see the capabilities that PromptFlow has around tracing and evaluation. So I want to build this application using PromptFlow and get all of that goodness and integrate it with Prompty. So let's right-click and select Add PromptFlow Code. So all of these code snippets are following a very basic, simple, and similar pattern. So they're going to load the Prompty, execute the Prompty with passing it the inputs and context that it needs, and then return the result. And we would be able to parse that result or show it however we wanted. Now, I mentioned before that I did a little bit of environment setup to make this work. And so I just want to highlight exactly what that was. So I created a virtual environment here. And all I needed was to install 2 packages, the PromptFlow package and the Azure Identity package. And then that means that I'm going to be able to run this out of the box. As a note, I also ran AZ login to authenticate my develop environment to Azure. So let's give this a run. And I'm going to open back up my PromptFlow. We'll give this a run. OK, let's see what I did here. Did I type something? I must have. Let's find out. Can help me with this error. Let's see. Did I make a change? I don't think I made a change. All right, let's try to run this again. So what we're expecting is to actually see a very similar output to what we got when we ran the Prompty, but it's just going to be running in this Python script with PromptFlow. And that's what we get. So we see that we're getting a JSON object back. We get our response again. And now we have a different joke. Let's see if it's any better. By the way, why don't tents ever run away to join the circus? Because they can't stand the polls. That still doesn't make any sense to me. Anyone? No? OK. So we could, of course, do a lot more to make this better. But so with just a few lines of code that were generated for me, I was able to run this out of the box with a PromptFlow implementation that integrated with the Prompty that I had. So hopefully you've seen so far that Prompty is a versatile prompt class and formatting tool. But because that's all it is and it's that simple, we could use Prompty to develop anything that we wanted. So for example, what if we developed a custom evaluator Prompty that could test and assess how well the joke that was told was related to the query? I'm not going to get into whether it's a good joke or not, but because we asked the Prompty, and I can show that again here, the joke should be directly related to the specific question asked. Let's write an evaluator Prompty that can help us assess whether that's the case. Now, normally, I would just click New Prompty and get started, but in the interest of time, I'm going to pull over an evaluator Prompty that I wrote before, and we'll walk through it together. OK. So a lot of this should look very similar. We have an eval Prompty, and it's mentioning that this Prompty evaluates whether a joke is related to the query. We have a similar configuration. We still want to be able to parse out the response consistently, so we're setting that JSON object response format. Now, we've also specified inputs here. This is something that I can choose to do or not. The sample in the first one was able to define those inputs for us. But just to be extra explicit here, I can add my inputs that are going to be the query and the joke. And let's look at the sample here. This is a joke that the model gave me before, and I think it's much better. So my query is, do I need any equipment to climb an average mountain? And the joke it gave me was, by the way, why do mountains make terrible meteorologists? Because they always predict peak conditions. I'm a big fan of this one. And so the system prompt, this is how we get into actually some prompt engineering for a custom evaluator. And it's really this simple. I'm just using natural language to define what I want this model to do. So I tell the system I'm an AI tool that determines if a joke is directly related to the main intent of the query. I'm going to ask it to score between 1 and 3, where 1 would be a joke entirely unrelated to the query, and 3 would be a joke that's directly related to the main intent. I'm also asking it to determine the main intent and then provide a reasoning for its score. So you can see here that I've asked it to provide a format with a score and reasoning. And the reasoning will help you understand a little bit about how the model is behaving and what other prompt engineering you might need to do to make it behave better. So because I've specified a sample here with a query and a joke, I can, again, run this using the run button in Prompty, and we can see the response. So let's give that a look. OK, so this pulled back up our Prompty output. We can see it's calling that same model that we specified. And we get a score of 3. And it actually provides some very detailed reasoning. The joke is directly related to the query. The query is about climbing mountains, and it references mountains and plays on the term peak conditions. And it's really giving us a lot of details here. It also says it pertains to weather predictions that might be considered during mountain climbing. So that's a pretty good response, and we've been able to validate it directly using Prompty. And now we want to integrate this back into our prompt flow code. So let me pull back up our code, and I'm actually going to split screen and close a few things so we can take a look at this together. So this is the code that we'd written before. And now, because this is just another Prompty, the code pattern is going to be very similar. So like we said before, we loaded the Prompty, and we provided it the context that it needed and parsed the result. So because we're going to add some more logic here, I'm going to print out the question that we're going to ask, and I'm going to print out the result. And now we can get started integrating with the new evaluator Prompty that we want to include. I'm also going to simplify this so that we're doing all of our printing inside the main function here. So path to Prompty is now I can update that just directly in the code. And of course, it's very hard to type when there's a lot of eyes on you. Eval.prompty. And then I want to load this. So this is going to be our eval flow. And I'm going to say prompty.load. And I can pass that path to Prompty in here. And then I want to parse this result. So let me say eval.response. Now, I know, looking on the left, what this expects. So we know that the inputs it needs are a query and a joke. So our query is going to be that question that we asked before, and we're printing out here. And then we need to pass it a joke. Now, this joke we haven't defined yet, so that's something that we need to extract from the result of the first flow. So let's go ahead and do that. So I can say, and I know that the result was that JSON object that had the response and the joke in it. So let's say this. And now, so that we can really clearly see what comes back, let's say evaluation results. I don't think there's anything harder than coding when people are watching you. And then we'll print out eval response. OK. Now, this is the same flow that we wrote. This is the same prompt flow code that we ran before. All we've done is added some extra logic. So let's give this a run. Now, some of you that are very familiar with Python may notice something that's not quite right with one of these lines of code. So this run is going to fail, but it's going to give me an opportunity to show you just how easy it is to debug. So I get an attribute error here. And because it's telling me that the dict object has no attribute joke, it makes me think that there's something not quite right on line 30. So I'm going to place a breakpoint here, and I'm going to debug this file. For those familiar with the VS Code, this is going to launch up the debugger experience. And what I expect is that the execution is gonna pause on line 30 where I set this breakpoint. Okay, and we can see that's what happened. So we see in the output, the question was printed, what can you tell me about your tense? The response that has both the response and the joke was printed there. Now, if I go to the debug console, I can verify that this is actually the line that's causing the issue. So result.joke clearly is outputting that same attribute error that I got before. And I know now the mistake that I made, and I can validate that this is the correct syntax by seeing that that parses out the joke. So by the way, why don't tents ever get lonely? This is one that we've sort of seen before. So now that I know this line of code is good, let me bring it back in here. And we should be good to give this a run. So what we're expecting to see here, just like before, is oh, I'm still in a debugger, aren't I? Let's give this a pause and give it another run now. I might have double run this, so we'll see what happens. But regardless, we're going to be loading the prompty. We're going to get the response, which is what we just see here. Now we expect it to do a little bit more. It's going to give us the evaluation result, and we expect to see a score and reasoning. So the score is a 3, and the reasoning, the joke, is directly related to the query, as it specifically mentions tense, which is the main subject of the query. So that's been the basics of developing with Prompty and Promptflow. And look, we even got 2 different responses here. That's actually really interesting. So the first time it gave a 3, the second time it gave a 2. And that's an exact example of like how you might go back to your evaluator, do some more prompt engineering to get the results that you expect. So that's been the basics. Of course, there's so much more that we could do with prompt engineering, data prep, evaluation. But for now, I'm going to pass back to Seth to dive deeper into an end-to-end application that showcases how Prompty can help you slay your AI dragons.
Let's give her a hand. Isn't that fantastic? Thank you so much, Leah.
Thanks, Seth.
Hopefully you saw that basically you are working with prompts as if you would work with a function, right? Are you seeing that? Hopefully you're feeling that, because the thing about prompt engineering to me is that we want prompt engineering to actually be prompt engineering, where you're typing things, you're looking at things in the preview, you're running it quickly, you're putting it into code, you're debugging it the way you debug stuff. And even though the response is stochastic, I had to use a $5 word once because this is the non-keynote keynote, right? Even though the response is stochastic, the way we deal with it as developers should not be that way. It should not be that way. It's something that we want to do. And you saw, like, the coolest part, I think, as I was watching Leah present, was it was basically code. You saw how to develop with Prompties. By the way, we have a really important question at the end. Using Prompty VS Code extension. We showed you how to add code snippets. Because one of the things is once you get this new stuff, it's like, well, how do I even write anything? We put it right in the extension so you can see an example. Do you have to use that code? No. But it definitely will get you started quicker, and you'll be able to do something faster. And you saw that we had LangChain, we had semantic kernel, and of course, Promptflow. You also saw her writing a custom evaluator. Did you know that the way that you evaluate these prompts is with other prompts? Those are called GPT star metrics, and they work really well. Like when you go to evaluation, when you hear about evaluation in all of our sessions, and you hear about groundedness or fluency or relevance, those are all prompts that are looking at input and measure exactly what she did. But it was more near and dear to my heart because it was a dad joke evaluator. She didn't want to say it, but she is the best dad joke giver of them all. So just be aware, so ask her for one. And then the last thing we saw is that she would integrate multiple prompties into a single piece of code, right? And that's, I think, the most interesting part, right? Because you hear about this kind of development that's called agentic, and you're like, wow, that feels like for some data scientist or someone smarter than me. But it turns out that agentic programming is basically making a prompt, looking at the response, and writing some code to do something after that. And then sometimes you put it in a loop. Sometimes the prompt decides when to break out of the loop. And when you think of it like that as a programmer, all of a sudden, the possibilities of doing things just increase. So I thought I would show you an agentic app, the GitHub repo's there. I'm going to be honest, I finished it last night just for you, but Cassie has built a much more, a better example that I'll give you the link to that has everything you have to. I wanted to do something a little bit smaller. We're going to write a multi-agent application that will basically, given a few instructions, will write blog posts for the Contoso Outdoor Company. Right? It will, like, you know how you're like, this is going to solve the blank page problem? How about we start solving the blank page problem right now? So this is a real app, so much so that it's actually, you can see it like literally running right here, right? This is Vite, and in the back end, there's a Flask. Oh, it looks like something, I'm gonna stop this here because it looks like I need to pf service, service stop, and then I'll start it again. I must have borked it. I'm so sorry. pf service start. Okay. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to start my Flask app. So basically, this is a Flask application running on the back end with a Vite front end, right? Because I wanted to do a UI. And so here we go. This is starting. Very nice. Everything's going. Let me go to my Node application and let me my Vite application, and there you go. You're like, oh no, Seth, it's broken. No, I am all about the minimalness here. So you can see right here, this is my entire app. Yeah, isn't it great? Can we get a hand for just getting out of the way? Yes, that's the beauty of Prompty. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say, hey, can you find the latest camping trends and what folks are doing in the winter? That's the research agent. Then we're going to say, hey, marketing person, can you find a selection of tents and sleeping bags that we write? Imagine someone, hey, I want you to write an article on latest camping trends and how to use our tents, right? This is basically kind of an instruction a human would give you, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run this, and let's cross our fingers here that everything's working. You're going to see each agent start to do some work. So here's the research agent. It went out on Bing and was like, oh, let's look up some camping activities, right? The second agent is going to go and look for some tents. And then the last agent is going to write the post. And you're looking at this and you're like, wow, this feels like the future. It is, but it's 3 Prompty files and code with each one, right? This agent takes a little bit longer because it has more tokens, but I think it's done. Shall we take a look at the work that I did in what was that, like 60 seconds? Winter is coming. I wish we had music in the back. Bringing with it a unique opportunity to experience the great outdoors in a whole new, doesn't that feel like, wow? Notice that, read more about Quincy building here. It has links. Then it starts to say, you should gear up. Here's some of our stuff. That's impressive, right? That's something that you can use right now. But generally, this feels like it's something that's out of reach for developers because you got to write some complicated thing. Let me show you that it isn't with Prompty. So when I go to Prompty, notice that this is how I like to, here, let me get this out of the way so you don't see that. Okay, this is how I like to formulate my code with Prompty. There is an agent for product, there is an agent for research, and there's an agent for writing. You're seeing some JSON files there. Let me explain what that means. Because what's happening is one of the agents gets a job and gets some output, right? Another agent gets a job and gets some output, and then the third agent needs both outputs. So how do you model that when you're doing prompting? I'll show you. So the first one is a pretty easy one. It's like, hey, if you have, here, let me minimize this so you can see it a little bit better. You're an AI assistant that helps people find information in a search index. If you get a query, come up with a list of things to search for, right? So it's like the marketing person that asks that. In the code behind, you're going to look at this. We basically do RAG with vector indexes, but it's just code, right? So here's generate embeddings. Here's me retrieving products. And if you're looking at it like, well, that's a lot of code, it's not. It's just the code you would use to query Cosmos DB or SQL Server. It's your code. Just because this is an index doesn't make it any more special than your 30-year-old Oracle database, which is still useful and still used and still needed to ground your models, right? Okay, so as I scroll down, you'll see the part where we actually do the prompting. I wish it was more exciting than that. The fact that it isn't should be super happy news for everybody, right? Okay, so remember, this other prompt requires the inputs of the other prompts from before, and so we have a facility here where you can actually do stuff like this, where you can pass input from a previous prompt. So literally what I'm doing is I'm iterating on a prompt, looking at the answer, getting the response right. Once I get a response I like and I need to start working on another prompt, what I do is I take the output of the previous prompt and I put it into a JSON file to test the next prompt, to quick iterate. And then I put some code under it, right? And then once we get the whole thing working, we can start building evaluation prompts with Prompties and using our evaluator SDK to load evaluations directly from Prompty. Do you see this? And so effectively, this multi-agent app that does something that, I mean, it's quite surprising, was done with 3 Prompty files, each one representing an agent that has not only the prompt, has the way to run it, but also has the code behind it to support that prompt. And then the orchestration, the reason why the orchestration is going to look a little more is because I wanted to yield, so you could see those things happening. But this is the entire thing. You get the research context, product context, and assignment, and we just research, we find products, and we write. That's it. It's cool, right? And that's the beautiful thing about using this kind of approach, is that now we can be coders again, but with a special superpower of using LLMs as a function. Okay, so you can look that up there. So what did I just see? Multi-agent writing system, refined prompt, use the output. Just treat the Prompty as like a different kind of function. And as you do, you can do that. There's other sessions where you can see how this thing traces out. I started the trace server, and you can totally trace all of these things, how they're running. And everything else is basically whatever else you do as a dev, which I think is the best part. So let's just summarize here in the last minute. We showed you how to get started with LLMs. We talked about what Prompty is, the 3 things. We talked about how to get started with Prompty. Leah masterfully showed us every single thing in there, and hopefully you saw, oh, I can do this. And the last thing is I showed you a multi-agent app with 3 Prompty files and some code. There's a lot of other information. Like if you want to start some of the other Prompty samples that we've seen throughout the conference, you can go to aka.ms/AZDAI templates. You can also see prompt-based evaluators that we have in our evaluation SDK. And if you want to send us feedback of a Prompty, because again, it's still early, we're trying to make this work, let us know, give us feedback, microsoft.github.io/Prompty. Just start putting stuff into the issues, and we are excited to make this work for you. And then there's a bunch of other sessions that you can go to or you can find online to learn more about how this integrates. But the most important thing is tell us what you want to do here, because we want to empower developers to use this wonderful new technology in the least disruptive way possible, in a way that helps you stay in your flow and yet deliver magical experiences. And this is the most important question that I was going to leave everybody. Is it, if there's a plural of this, should it be promptees or Prompty? We don't know. So, the second one, thank you. Yes, the second one? Okay, that's what I thought. I told everyone, but people argue with me. Also, if you want to access Azure ML Insiders, you can go here. Azure ML is where we do all of this stuff at the base layer. Hopefully this was helpful. Thank you so much for your time.